The note was tucked under my granddaughter's pillow. I wasn't looking for it. I was changing her sheets because she'd had another nightmare, the third one that week, and when I lifted the pillowcase, a folded piece of paper fell onto the floor. I almost didn't read it. Then I saw my son's handwriting on the outside. For Emma, when she's old enough. My son had been dead for 11 days. I need to tell you how I ended up standing in that hallway at 2 in the morning, holding a letter I was never supposed to find, in a house that didn't belong to me anymore, in a life that no longer made sense. My name is Walter Greer. I'm 64 years old, retired after 31 years as a dispatcher for the Claremont County Sheriff's Department. I've heard things on that radio that would keep most people from sleeping. I thought I was hard to shock. I was wrong. My son Daniel was 38 years old when he died. Heart attack, the medical examiner said. No sign of foul play. Perfectly healthy man goes to bed on a Tuesday night and doesn't wake up Wednesday morning. His wife, Patricia, found him. She called me at 6:15 a.m., and by the time I got there, the paramedics were already bringing him out in a black bag. Patricia and I had never been close. She was a quiet woman, guarded in a way I could never quite read. She loved Daniel, I believed that. But there was always something held back, something behind her eyes that I couldn't reach. She came from a difficult family. Her father, Raymond Hollis, was a man I had disliked from the first handshake. Too smooth, too practiced, the kind of man who looked at you while thinking about something else entirely. After the funeral, Patricia asked me to help sort through Daniel's things. Her own father had offered, but she refused him, which I noted but didn't ask about. My granddaughter Emma was staying with her other grandmother in Roanoke, which meant it was just the two of us in the house for most of that first week. Quiet, careful work. The kind of grief that moves slowly through rooms and doesn't speak. On the 6th day, Patricia drove to the pharmacy to refill a prescription, and I went upstairs alone. Daniel had kept a home office in the spare bedroom. Bookshelves, a desk, boxes of papers from his accounting work. I was looking for his insurance documents when I noticed the door at the end of the hall was closed. Not just closed. There was a sliding bolt on it, the kind you'd put on a bathroom door. Except this was the door to the guest room. The bolt was on the outside. I hadn't noticed it before. I didn't think much of it at first. Patricia was particular about the house. Maybe she stored things in there she didn't want disturbed. Then Emma came home that weekend. She was 7 years old, Daniel's daughter. My whole world compressed into 42 pounds of missing front teeth and 2 big sneakers. She'd been quiet since the funeral, not crying the way you'd expect, just watching everything with those serious dark eyes that looked so much like her father's it made my chest hurt. We were eating cereal together Saturday morning when she looked up at me over her bowl and said, "Grandpa, did you go in the room with the lock?" "No," I said. "What's in that room?" She was quiet for a moment, stirring her cereal. "Daddy's stuff." "What kind of stuff?" She looked toward the hallway. She said Daddy was keeping things safe in there. Important things. She said she put the lock on so nobody could get them before they were supposed to. She who? Emma looked back at her cereal. She didn't answer. Patricia came in from the other room then, and Emma went quiet in the way that children go quiet when they've said something they weren't supposed to say. Not guilty quiet, careful quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from practice. I didn't ask again. But I didn't stop thinking about it either. That night, after Emma was asleep and Patricia had gone to bed, I walked down the hall and stood in front of that door. I pressed my hand flat against it the way you press your hand against a wall to feel if there's a fire on the other side. I went back to the guest room. I want to tell you something I've learned in 64 years of living. There is a difference between the quiet of an empty room and the quiet of a room where something is being kept. I have heard both. I know them the way I know the difference between a car engine running well and a car engine about to fail. They sound the same on the surface. They are not the same. That room had the wrong kind of quiet. I went home that night without touching the bolt. The next morning I called my friend Harold, who had worked homicide for the county for 22 years before his retirement. We had coffee every Wednesday at the diner on Maple, The two of us and our combined 120 years of watching things go wrong. I didn't tell him everything. I told him enough. Harold was quiet for a moment. He said, "Walter, what do you know about how Daniel died?" "I know what the medical examiner said." "What was the tox screen?" I hadn't asked about the tox screen. I drove to the county records office that afternoon. The preliminary tox report had flagged an elevated level of potassium chloride in Daniel's bloodstream. The medical examiner had noted it and then attributed it to the natural process of cardiac cell breakdown after death, a known phenomenon called pseudo-hyperkalemia. It was within the range that sometimes occurs naturally. Harold looked at the report for a long time when I showed it to him. He said, "It's also within the range of an injection." The bolt on that door became a different thing to me after that conversation. It was no longer curious. It was urgent. I went back to the house on a Tuesday when Patricia was at work and Emma was at school. I told myself I had left a pair of reading glasses there, which was true. I told myself I would just look in the room, which was also true. I told myself I wouldn't touch anything, which turned out to be a lie. The bolt slid open easily. The room was neat, a guest bed with a white coverlet, a dresser, a closet, and in the corner, under the window, a cedar chest. The kind you see at the foot of old beds, the kind grandmothers keep extra quilts in. This one had a combination lock through the hasp. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Emma's voice came back to me. Daddy was keeping things safe in there, important things. I called Emma. I told myself I wouldn't do this either. I'm not proud of it. She was at school, so I called my daughter-in-law's mother in Roanoke, who called the school, who had Emma call me back from the office. I said, "Emma, sweetheart, do you know the numbers for the lock on the chest in the room with the bolt?" A long pause on the line. "Grandpa, did something happen?" "No, baby. I'm trying to help Daddy keep things safe, like he wanted." Another pause. Then she said, "It's my birthday." 4 numbers. May 3rd, 2017. 0503. The lock opened on the second try. Inside the cedar chest were 3 things: a manila envelope, fat with papers, a smartphone in a black case, the screen cracked down the middle, and a child's drawing, the kind Emma made, crayon and marker, a house and a sun and 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands. At the bottom in Emma's handwriting, "Daddy and me." I sat on the edge of the guest bed, and I opened the manila envelope. It took me a long time to understand what I was reading. The papers were photocopies mostly. Articles and records and handwritten notes in Daniel's neat accountant's handwriting. He had been thorough. He had been careful. He had been working on something for months, maybe longer, and he had been doing it in secret. The oldest document was a newspaper clipping from the Hollis County Gazette, dated September 4th, 1991. The headline read, "Local Girl 9, missing 3 weeks. Family asks for information." The girl's name was Margaret Hollis. Age 9. Last seen August 14th, 1991, at her home on Ridgeline Road. No body found. Case went cold. Raymond Hollis was Margaret's older brother. He was 19 years old in 1991. The next document was a property record. In October 1991, 6 weeks after Margaret's disappearance, Raymond Hollis had purchased a 12-acre parcel of land in Decker County, 90 miles from where he grew up. He paid cash. He was 19 years old, unemployed, the son of a mill worker. The deed listed the purchase price as $1, transferred by a private party whose name I recognized immediately. Gerald Mace, a man who had died in 2018 and who had been for 37 years the Hollis County District Attorney. I set those papers down on the bed. I picked them back up. Daniel's handwritten notes filled 6 pages. He had traced the connection between Raymond Hollis, Gerald Mace, and the disappearance of little Margaret Hollis over what appeared to be more than a year of private investigation. He had found 2 more children, cases from the late 80s and early 90s, rural counties, cold cases, bodies never recovered, all within a 40-mile radius of where Raymond Hollis had grown up. He had noted that Raymond had worked, briefly, as a handyman and groundskeeper at various properties in that area during those years. He had written one sentence at the bottom of the last page, underlined twice. "I think Patricia knows. My daughter-in-law's father might have killed children. My son had discovered it. My son was dead at 38 years old from a cause of death that could have been natural or could have been something else entirely, and the man whose crimes he had been documenting was Raymond Hollis, who had stood at the graveside 11 days ago with his hand on Patricia's shoulder. I sat in that room for a long time. Then I picked up the cracked smartphone. I had no way to unlock it, but the charging cable was coiled beside it in the chest, and when I plugged it in and held down the home button, a notification appeared on the cracked screen. A voicemail, dated October 19th, 6 days before Daniel died, from an unknown number. I couldn't access it without the passcode. I called Harold. He came to the house within the hour. He looked at the papers the way I had looked at them, slowly, in silence, with the particular stillness of a man who has seen things he couldn't unknow. He made 2 phone calls from the kitchen, speaking quietly, and when he came back to the guest room, he said, "Walter, we need to take these to Detective Arnie Pierce. He owes me about 15 favors, and he's the most careful man I know. What about Patricia?" Harold looked at me steadily. "What about her?" Daniel wrote that she knows. Harold was quiet. Then he said, "Your son wrote that he thought she knows. That's not the same thing. We drove to Arnie's house that evening. He was 3 years from retirement and looked every day of it, but his eyes were sharp and his silence was the working kind, the kind that processes while the surface stays still." He listened without interrupting. He looked at every document. He held the cracked phone for a long time before setting it down. Then he said, "I'm going to need to make some calls of my own." Over the next 4 days, I didn't sleep well. I went about the mechanics of grief, showing up at Patricia's house to help Emma with homework, to bring food that nobody really ate, to sit in Daniel's living room where the air still smelled faintly of his coffee and pretend that I didn't know what I knew. Patricia was quieter than ever. She moved through the house like someone listening for something. Once, when Emma was in the backyard and Patricia and I were washing dishes together, she said, without looking at me, "He worried too much. Daniel, he always worried too much about things he couldn't change." I kept washing the dish in my hand. She said, "Some things are better left alone, Walter." I looked at her then. She was staring at the window above the sink, at her own reflection in the dark glass. Her face looked like a woman standing at the edge of something. I said, "Patricia, did you know what Daniel found?" A long pause. The water ran between us. She said, "I knew he was looking into something. I didn't know how far he'd gotten." "Did you know about your father?" The dish she was holding went still in her hands. She didn't answer for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "I've known something was wrong with my father since I was 12 years old. I found a photograph. I didn't understand what I was looking at. Not entirely. But I understood enough to know that I would spend the rest of my life not asking questions, not making him angry, not becoming someone he decided needed to be handled." She turned and looked at me then, and I saw something in her face that I had mistaken, all these years, for coldness. It wasn't cold. It was exhausted. It was the face of someone who had been holding a terrible weight for a very long time and had learned to carry it so carefully that it looked like stillness. She said, "I didn't know Daniel would die. I thought he'd find enough to go to the police and I could pretend I hadn't known. I could pretend I was surprised. I was going to let him do what I was too afraid to do myself." I said, "Did your father kill Daniel?" She closed her eyes. "I don't know. I don't know, and that is the worst thing I have ever lived with." The investigation opened officially on a Thursday morning. Arnie Pierce and 2 detectives from the State Bureau showed up at Raymond Hollis's home in Glenside with a warrant. Raymond was in his kitchen eating breakfast. He looked at the warrant, looked at the detectives, and said, without any visible change in expression, "I'd like to call my lawyer." He had the flat affect of someone who had been waiting for this knock for 33 years and had long since made peace with it. The 12-acre parcel in Decker County had a barn on it. The foundation of the barn was poured concrete, laid in the fall of 1991 by a contractor who told investigators he had been hired by a young man who paid cash and wanted the floor done quickly before winter set in. Ground-penetrating radar found 3 anomalies beneath that concrete within the first hour of examination. I will not describe what was found. I will only tell you that Margaret Hollis was one of them, that she was 8 years old when she disappeared, that she had been missing for 33 years, and her parents had died without knowing what had happened to her, and her mother had kept a candle in the window of the old house on Ridgeline Road until the day she died because she read once that if you keep a light burning, lost children can find their way home. Raymond Hollis was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice spanning more than 3 decades. Gerald Mace was dead and beyond the reach of prosecution, but his name was in the file, the land transfer that had bought 33 years of silence, and it would follow his legacy wherever it went. The question of Daniel's death took longer. The tox screen was re-examined by a forensic pathologist brought in from Richmond. Her conclusion was careful and qualified. The potassium levels were consistent with either natural post-mortem changes or an injection administered in the hours before death. She could not say with certainty which it was. Not enough evidence for a murder charge. Not enough evidence. I sat with that for a long time. I still sit with it sometimes, on the nights when I can't sleep and the house is too quiet and I find myself running through the timeline in my mind, the way I used to run through dispatch logs looking for the moment something went wrong. I don't know if Raymond Hollis killed my son. I believe he did. I believe Daniel got close enough that Raymond made a decision the way he had made decisions before, cleanly and without remorse. But belief is not evidence. And evidence is what courts require, and Raymond Hollis will die in prison for the 3 children under the concrete whether or not anyone can ever prove what he did to Daniel. It has to be enough. Some days it is. Patricia was not charged with any crime. The investigators found no evidence that she had known the specific details of what her father had done. Only that she had known, in the way children know things they're never told, that the darkness around him was real. She had protected herself the only way she knew how, by not looking directly at it for 26 years. The family court proceedings were something I hadn't anticipated. Patricia came to me herself, 2 months after the investigation began, and we sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold between us, and she said, "Walter, I want you to have full custody of Emma." I looked at her. She said, "I am not the right person to raise her right now. Maybe I will be someday. But right now I am so broken I can barely get out of bed in the morning, and Emma deserves better than watching me try to hold myself together. She trusts you. She's always trusted you. You're the one she called when she needed someone to open that chest." I said, "Patricia." I said her name and stopped. She said, "I'm not abandoning her. I'm choosing who is safest for her right now." There's a difference. Emma moved in with me in February. We live in the house I've owned for 21 years, the one where Daniel grew up, the one with the backyard maple tree he used to climb, and the kitchen where his mother made Sunday dinners before she passed. Emma has the room that was Daniel's. I painted it lavender because she asked for lavender. There are glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. She helped me stick them up. She sees a therapist named Dr. Willa Chen every Tuesday afternoon, a small woman with reading glasses and a very calm voice who told me in our first parent meeting that Emma is grieving in a healthy way, that she is a child with remarkable emotional awareness, and that the most important thing I can do is be consistent, be present, and be honest with her in the ways that are age-appropriate. I'm trying to do all 3. Emma asks about her father often. She asks questions I don't always have clean answers to, the way children's questions never quite line up with the answers adults have prepared. She asked me once if Daddy knew he was going to die. I told her I didn't know. She thought about that for a moment and then said, "I think he did. I think that's why he put the note under my pillow." The note. The one I found under her pillowcase the night I was changing her sheets. I hadn't opened it. It wasn't addressed to me. It was for Emma, when she's old enough. I put it in the cedar chest, which sits now at the foot of Emma's lavender bed, still holding the things Daniel wanted to keep safe. I told Emma it was there. I told her that when she decides she's ready to read it, I'll sit with her. She's 8 now. She thinks maybe when she's 10, maybe 12. She'll know when it's time. Kids always do. I'm 64 years old, retired, raising my granddaughter in the house where my son grew up. I cook dinner every night. I go to every school, play, and every soccer game and every parent-teacher conference that involves a chart showing how Emma is doing with reading comprehension. Extremely well, her teacher told me last semester, beaming. She's already reading 2 grades ahead. Of course she is. She is her father's daughter. Patricia visits twice a month. She is in intensive therapy, finally dismantling the architecture of terror her father built around her childhood and called discipline. It is slow, painful work. I have watched her do it with a kind of quiet courage that I missed entirely during the years I was busy not understanding her. She is not the woman I thought she was. She was never the woman I thought she was. She was someone surviving a thing I didn't have the eyes to see. I don't carry resentment toward her anymore. I tried to for a while. It was exhausting. It required too much energy that Emma needed more. Raymond Hollis was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms. He was 61 years old. He sat at the defense table through the entire verdict without expression, the same empty calm he had worn the morning they arrested him. His lawyer appealed on procedural grounds. The appeal was denied. The families of the other 2 children were present for the verdict. I was not. I had Emma that day and I couldn't find appropriate childcare, and honestly, I didn't trust myself to sit in that room and watch him and not fall apart in a way I couldn't take back. Harold went for me. He called me from the parking lot afterward, and his voice was different than I had heard it before, rougher, and he said, "Walter, they got him. All of it. He's not coming out." I was in the kitchen when he called. Emma was at the table behind me doing a puzzle, one of those 500-piece ones with birds on it, her dark head bent in concentration. I watched her fit 2 pieces together and look up at the picture on the box to check her work. And I had to put my hand on the counter because my legs weren't entirely reliable for a moment. "Thank you," I said to Harold. He said, "Daniel started this. He deserves the credit." "Yes," I said. "He does." I visited Daniel's grave last month, early morning before Emma woke up. October, the trees just turning. The kind of morning where the light is still slanted and gold and the air smells like the year ending. I stood at his headstone for a long time. I didn't have a speech prepared. I never do, with Daniel. I always just ended up talking to him the way we talked when he was alive, in the practical language of people who love each other without ceremony. I told him Emma had made the honor roll. I told him she was obsessed with birds now, and had already identified 32 species with a field guide she checked out from the library, and that she was determined to reach 50 before her birthday. I told him her nightmares were getting less frequent. I told him about the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling of her lavender room, and that she had very specific opinions about which constellation went where, and that she was mostly right. Then I said, "I don't know if you heard everything that happened. I think you probably do. I hope wherever you are, it's enough to know that it mattered. What you found, what you did, with what you found, it mattered." I stood there a while longer. The groundskeeper was raking leaves near the entrance, and a mockingbird was working through its repertoire in the oak tree above the next plot over, cycling through 8 or 9 different calls, never stopping, the way they never stop. I said, "I've got her, son. She's okay. I've got her." Then I drove home and made Emma's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with too much syrup, and we ate together at the kitchen table with the morning light coming through the window, and she told me about the birds in her field guide, about the difference between a house finch and a purple finch, about how you can tell them apart by the streaks on the breast and the coloring above the eye. And I listened to every word. That's what I want to tell you. If you're watching this, if you're a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle or neighbor, I want you to hear what I learned too late and too slowly. Children carry things they can't name. They carry knowledge in their bodies before they have the language for it. Emma knew something was wrong with that locked door. She knew her father had put something important behind it. She knew, in the way that children know, without being told, in the way that knowledge lives in the nervous system before it ever reaches words. And she trusted me with it. Pay attention when the child in your life goes quiet around a particular person. Pay attention to the nightmares, the flinching, the careful watching. Pay attention to the things they almost say and then don't. They are telling you something. They are asking you, in the only language available to them, to help them carry what they shouldn't have to carry alone. I spent 31 years as a dispatcher, receiving emergencies, routing help to the people who needed it. The hardest thing I ever learned in that job was that someone has to make the call first. Someone has to pick up the phone and say something is wrong. For a long time, I waited for that call to come from someone else. I kept washing the dish. I kept pretending the quiet in that room was the right kind of quiet. Daniel didn't wait. He picked up the phone. He made the call that cost him everything and gave Emma her life back, and I will spend whatever years I have left making sure she knows that. Right now, she's outside in the backyard, identifying birds. I can see her through the kitchen window, standing very still under the maple tree with her field guide open, looking up at something in the branches. Patient, focused, her whole small self aimed at what she's looking for. 8 years old, missing front teeth. Her father's eyes. My whole world. Be the person who pays attention. Be the person who asks the question. Be the person who opens the chest and reads the papers and makes the call when the child in front of you is trying to tell you something is wrong. You might be the only one who hears them. Make sure you're listening. Thanks for being here. This has been Pal Saga. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who loves a child. You don't have to explain why. They'll know.